India's skilling problem may be much bigger than simply asking one question: are young Indians getting jobs? A new NITI Aayog report says around 8.7 crore Indians aged 15 to 29 are outside education, employment or training, the group commonly described as NEET. And here is the number that changes the entire story. Nearly 88% of this group is engaged in domestic duties. So this is not simply a story about unemployed young people sitting without work. It is a story about millions who have fallen outside India's traditional pipeline from education to employment, and about why getting them back into that pipeline may be much harder than simply creating more training courses. The findings come from NITI Aayog's report, Reimagining Skilling for Viksit Bharata 2047. The report uses data from the 78th round of the National Sample Survey conducted in 2021. It looks at India's skilling challenge across roughly 60 crore citizens, divided into 5 broad groups. School students, people in tertiary education, formal and informal workers, young people outside education, employment and training, and women as a cross-cutting group. The central idea is that India's skilling system cannot simply wait for people to graduate, lose a job, or walk into a training center. People's lives are much less linear than that. Someone can leave school, someone can enter work, someone can stop working to care for family, someone can need new skills years later, and someone who dropped out of education may need another opportunity to come back. That is where the 8.7 crore figure becomes important. These young people are not necessarily all unemployed. The NEET category includes people who are outside education, employment and training for different reasons. And according to NITI Aayog, around 88% are engaged in domestic duties. That finding is especially important because it challenges a very common assumption about India's employment problem. If millions of young people are outside the education and employment system because of household responsibilities, then simply increasing the number of training centers may not solve the problem. The barrier may come much earlier. It can be money. It can be the income someone loses while attending training. It can be the cost of education they have already paid for. It can be a lack of flexible courses. And for women, the obstacles can include caregiving, family expectations, safety, and mobility. The NITI Aayog report's analysis of women makes this particularly clear. It says only about 3% of women are in formal jobs, while around 71% are either working informally or belong to the young population outside education, employment, and training. And even when women want to acquire skills, many are looking for something that can fit around their existing responsibilities. Around 68% of women surveyed prefer part-time skilling courses. Another 30% prefer short-duration courses. That tells us something important. For many women, the question is not, is there a training course? The question is, can I realistically attend it? Imagine a training center just a few kilometers away. On paper, it is accessible. But if a woman has children to look after, household responsibilities, restrictions on traveling alone, or concerns about safety, those few kilometers can become a major barrier. The report illustrates this through the example of Sangeeta. She marries young, has children, and wants to acquire a skill that could allow her to earn additional income. But family responsibilities and safety concerns prevent her from traveling far or committing to a full-day course. This is why NITI Aayog is arguing for a much more flexible skilling architecture. Instead of assuming that everybody can follow the same path, the proposed system creates multiple entry, exit, and re-entry points. A young person could leave education and later return through a short course. They could earn a micro-credential. They could enter an apprenticeship. They could acquire a skill while working, and they could potentially move back into education or employment later. The idea is simple. Dropping out once should not mean being locked out forever. And this is one of the biggest changes proposed by the report. India's existing skilling ecosystem often measures success by numbers. How many people enrolled? How many completed a course? How many certificates were issued? But NITI Aayog wants the focus to shift toward outcomes. Did the person actually become employable? Did their income increase? Did they progress in their career? Did the skill lead to a sustained livelihood? That is a much harder question to answer, but it is arguably a much more important one. Because India does not simply need millions of people holding training certificates. It needs people whose skills actually connect with jobs, businesses, and local economic opportunities. The report therefore proposes a system based on 3 broad principles: non-linear learning pathways, lifelong skilling, and outcome-based measurement. The first recognizes that education and employment are no longer necessarily one straight journey. The second recognizes that people may need to learn new skills multiple times throughout their lives. And the third asks whether that learning actually produces economic results. There is also a strong local element to the proposal. NITI Aayog argues that states should play a central role and that education, skilling and employment systems should be connected to local labor markets and district level needs. Because a skill that is valuable in Bengaluru may not have the same demand in a rural district in Bihar, and a training program that works for a full-time urban worker may be completely unsuitable for a woman balancing childcare and household responsibilities in a small town. So the proposed answer is not simply build more training centers, it is make the entire system easier to enter, leave, return to and combine with real life. For women, NITI Aayog proposes interventions including trusted local spaces, skill discovery platforms, targeted skill vouchers and hyperlocal flexible work opportunities. That last part is particularly important, because training alone does not create employment. If someone learns a skill, but there is no nearby opportunity to use it, the certificate may have very little economic value. This is why the report is trying to connect skilling with actual livelihoods. And that brings us back to the 8.7 crore figure. It is tempting to look at that number and say, India has 8.7 crore young people without jobs. But that would be misleading. The report is showing something more complicated. It is showing a massive population of young Indians who are currently outside the conventional education to work pipeline. And for a very large majority of them, domestic responsibilities are part of the reason. That means India's demographic dividend cannot be unlocked simply by producing more degrees or more certificates. The country has to address the conditions that prevent people from participating in education, training and work in the first place. For women especially, that means looking at childcare, mobility, safety, flexible working arrangements, and local employment. For young people generally, it means creating pathways back into education and work after interruptions. And for the skilling system itself, it means accepting one uncomfortable reality. People's lives do not follow a straight line. The old model was simple: school, college, job, retirement. But millions of Indians do not experience life that way. They drop out, they switch careers, they take care of parents, they raise children, they lose jobs, they work informally, they move cities, they return to education, and sometimes they need to start again. A modern skilling system has to be designed around that reality. NITI Aayog's proposal is essentially an attempt to build that flexibility into the system. The government has already earmarked Rs 600 crore for FY27 for the Ministry of Skill Development and Entrepreneurship under the Integrated Scheme in Skilling Architecture. State-level transformation pilots have also been proposed in Andhra Pradesh, Odisha, Uttar Pradesh, Bihar and Assam. But the real challenge will be implementation, because identifying 8.7 crore people is one thing. Getting them back into education, training, or productive employment is another. And if 88% of that group is engaged in domestic duties, the solution cannot simply be another classroom. It has to fit around people's lives. That is ultimately what makes this NITI Aayog report significant. The 8.7 crore figure is not just a joblessness statistic. It is a warning that India's education to employment pipeline is leaving a huge number of young people outside the system. And if India wants to achieve its Viksit Bharat ambitions by 2047, the answer may not be more certificates. It may be a system where people can learn, work, stop, restart, retrain and move forward without having to begin from zero every time. Because India's biggest skilling challenge may not be teaching people new skills. It may be finding a way to make sure millions of people who have already fallen out of the system can get back in.